All right. Happy Monday, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are watching me from around the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's live teaching. I am live. I am Krista Bontrager. I am a public theologian and Christian apologist, and this is the channel where I offer teaching about the Bible and theological commentary on social issues. And I forgot to put my earrings on, and I was trying to do it the last minute. My husband's like, "You're on in 3 seconds." So won't be any earrings today. But last month, I did a 3-part series on various issues related to anti-Semitism. And most importantly, I tried to offer a biblical definition of the issue and describe some of the shortcomings that I see happening in the public conversation related to the topic. But this issue is continuing to build steam on social media with a growing narrative about what I'm going to call deep state Jews, for lack of a better term, who are said to be controlling practically every industry on the planet. If you haven't seen those posts, it's okay. If you want to see kind of a sampling of posts, go visit our friend Carrie Smith from the Deprogrammed podcast. We had her on the podcast back in like 2020. She did a string this week to document a lot of the typical things that are being said on social media along these lines. It's a little sobering to see. We are not going to read all of these, but I'm just going to have Bob flash the thread up here for you so you know what it looks like. If you're on X and you want to go try to find it, look for Real Carrie Smith from the Deprogrammed podcast. And she put together this whole thread. Bob can just scroll through it real quick here, but we went over cartoons like this last time, and she just did a bunch of screen caps of all different kinds of things that are happening on X and how people are having the conversation about Jews and the Jewish people and the state of Israel. And it's pretty divisive. And people are definitely taking sides, and this whole issue is mushrooming pretty quickly. You never used to hear mainstream conservatives talking this way, 3 to 5 years ago. And now we're in a situation where we have major conservative influencers, some of whom name the name of Jesus, speaking out against Israel, and about some of them on different various levels may hold to a belief in a Jewish cabal of wickedness. And they talk about it on a regular basis now. Honestly, if I'm honest, it's all a little overwhelming for me. And I've done my best to try to sift through everything and help guide you through the conversation to the best of my ability in being fair and biblical. And I know that I have covered the issues related to Judaism in Israel in a number of different ways on the channel over the last 14 months or so. But I do want to cover 2 specific issues today that I have not discussed before. And then we're going to close the book on this topic for a while and move on to some other issues. But let me start with the first issue. Before I do that, though, please, if you're watching on the live, feel free to jump into the chat and send me your questions as we go along. I will make a point of stopping a few times to take a look at those, okay? So, all right, so let's start with the first issue. And I want to tackle the question, what does the term Judeo-Christian mean? There's been a lot of conversation about this on social media, particularly on X. And I've had a few people write into the ministry and they're like, I don't really understand this term Judeo-Christian. What does that actually mean? So I want to kind of break it down for you in a very easy to understand way. So the fact that the term Judeo-Christian is kind of controversial, which To me, it's never seemed like a controversial term. Kind of first got on my radar a few months ago. Father Calvin Robinson, who I am going to call a Anglican adjacent, Catholic adjacent, British. I think he's still technically a priest. He's a person that I have a lot of personal opinions about, but I'm not going to share those publicly. But he did post this on X. I believe this was back in November, and he was a recent immigrant to America at that time. So I'm going to have Bob just play like the first minute of this clip. So the reason he's British, but he has an American flag, is because at this time he was living in Michigan, and he really does love America, and he loves his home country of Britain, but he feels very conflicted about the British government. So, Bob, just go ahead and play like the first minute 3 of this.
I put out a tweet this morning that mentioned the J word, and I try never to mention the J word because you get it from both sides. You get the right wing saying you need to become an anti-Semite. You get the left wing saying you are an anti-Semite. You get the right wing saying you're a Zionist. You get the left wing saying you need to become a Zionist or whatever. I don't care whichever faction it is. But my stance is that I'm a Christian and I put Christ first. So I ask the question, where the hell did Judeo-Christian values come from? What does this term mean? I know what Christian values are. They're what built the West. What are Judeo-Christian values? And the kickback I got from that is ridiculous. I'm not saying that people should hate Jews. I'm not saying that. I'm asking a simple question. Why do we put Judeo before Christian? Why do we put anything before Christian? I don't believe in putting anything before Christ. I think he told us that the only way to the Father is through the Son. And therefore, if we love people, including Jews, if we love everybody, we want them all to come to know our Lord, because he is the only way to get into heaven. That's the Christian message.
Okay, so Natalie's saying in the comments that Father Calvin he wants to return the Anglican Church to Rome. I think that's possibly a fair statement. Anyways, so this is the video that I saw that first got this whole issue on my radar back in November. And this conversation quickly mushroomed into other conversations. Joel Webbin had Father Calvin on his podcast, and they continued to try to kind of make the case that Judeo-Christianity, the term Judeo-Christian, is not a thing. And then it just kind of spiraled into this, I don't know, theological purity spiral, for lack of a better term, about whether or not Christians should even use the term Judeo-Christian. And when they do, should they be publicly shamed and anathematized for it? And it was a lot, and it just escalated so quickly. So let me see if I can help clear things up a little bit. I think there is one way of using the phrase Judeo-Christian that is perfectly appropriate and accurate. And I think there is a second way of using the term Judeo-Christian that Christians should not use, that is out of step with historic Christianity. And in the clip that we just watched with Father Calvin, he kind of conflates both of them. And I think that that's, part of the problem. So let me explain the first option and when I think it could be appropriate to use the term Judeo-Christian. So the term itself, Judeo-Christian, is kind of this hyphenated word, emerged in the 19th, early 20th centuries, particularly in the United States and in the West, to summarize a cultural and religious unity that Jews and Christians share. And it was kind of a reaction against secularism or atheism. And it was a shorthand way, the phrase Judeo-Christian was a shorthand way of referring to the shared heritage and influence that both traditional classical Judaism and Christianity have had on philosophy, law and social politics. Okay. So where did this term Judeo-Christian come from? Well, it's really very simple. It's because they share the same foundation. Traditional Judaism, much like traditional Christianity, and again, I'm not talking about progressive manifestations of these religions here, both understand certain principles and truths from particularly Genesis 1 to 3 in a lot of the same way. They have a lot of shared understandings of the creation mandate, if you will, and the purpose of humanity, that humans are created in the image of God, that human life is sacred, and humans were created to rule and reign over the earth and to build culture, to work, to worship, and that ultimately they fell into sin and something has corrupted humanity and corrupted God's good creation. And Jews and Christians also share many general principles from Exodus and Deuteronomy that form the foundation of our legal system. I did an entire teaching about that issue a few months ago, and I have put a link to that teaching in the description. But there is this some shared overlap and principles between the two religions, namely because we share the same holy book. We both share the Old Testament. So using the term Judeo-Christian to signify a set of beliefs or values or traditions that are shared by or derived from Judaism and Christianity, I think is perfectly appropriate and accurate. It emphasizes the historical and theological connections between the two monotheistic religions, both of which again trace their origins to the Hebrew Bible. The term Judeo-Christian is used commonly as a summary way to summarize the ethical framework, particularly in Western culture, that includes concepts like the Ten Commandments, belief in one God, moral principles such as justice, compassion, and the sanctity of life. Now, this is not to say, I should not be understood as saying that the religions of Christianity and Judaism are exactly the same. We spent an entire episode last week with Dr. Broshi, as well as in October of 2023, I did a whole episode explaining major differences between Judaism and Christianity. So this point brings me to the second use of the term Judeo-Christian, which I think is mostly what Father Calvin is referring to. And that is the idea of saying that God has two plans of salvation, one for the Jews and another for the Gentiles, namely Christianity. And as we made very, very clear in our discussion with Dr. Broshi a couple weeks ago, God has one plan of salvation, and that is through the Jewish Messiah named Jesus. To become what we call a Christian, or to affirm Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, for the Jewish person in particular, it is the most Jewish thing that a Jew can do. Christianity is not some separate thing that is so separate that Jews have no place in Christianity. And when a Gentile comes into God's covenant and he becomes part of God's covenant people, we are, in a way, doing a very Jewish thing. Jesus came and expanded the family and invited the Gentiles into the covenant without having to first convert to Judaism. Okay. Again, I did a whole teaching about this back in October of 2023. Let me just summarize this point by reading Romans chapter 11 and reading a few verses there. I'm going to start with Romans chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. I ask then, this is the Apostle Paul speaking, has God rejected his people? Because they rejected him as Messiah. Has God rejected his people, the Jews? By no means. For I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, a member of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Okay, let's skip down to verse 11. So I ask, did they stumble in order that they might fall? By no means, Paul says. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. So God still has one people. It is the assembly of the Messiah. It is the church, okay? It is the ecclesia, or the assembly of Jesus. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their future means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their inclusion mean? In other words, someday the Jews will be fully coming into the covenant. They will accept Jesus as their Messiah. Now, I'm speaking to you Gentiles. I'm speaking to you Gentiles in Rome. Inasmuch then as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous and thus save some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But some of the branches were broken off. In other words, some Jews were unfaithful. And you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree. The Gentiles are the newcomers. We are grafted into the people of God. It is not that God's people has shifted to the Gentiles. It's just we're in the majority right now, but God has one people. He has one assembly, one ecclesia, okay? And we Gentiles have been invited in to become God's people. But Jews have always been had a role to play in God's people, and they are the ones with the covenants and the promises and the prophets. We went over all of those verses some time ago. All right, let's read a few more here. All right, I'm going to pick it up. 18. Do not be arrogant toward the branches. In other words, do not be arrogant toward those native branches, the Jews. If you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but the root supports you. We are the foreigners coming into the covenant. And so don't be arrogant about our place in it. Then you will say, branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Let's go down to verse 25. Lest you be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob, and this will be my covenant with them, and I will take away their sins. So what do we have here? We have Paul's warning to the Gentiles. Don't be so cocky as to think that you have replaced the Jews. No, God's ecclesia, his assembly, has always included the Jews. Now, they've been a minority. They are in a period of unbelief. But if we are using the term, well, first of all, I just want to make that position very clear of how Christians are to think about the Jews. We ought to be in a posture of humility and gratitude that God in his providence has made a way for the Gentiles to come into the covenant. But what we don't want to do is use the term Judeo-Christian to refer to some kind of hybrid religion where there's kind of two faiths and they're equal, and we are using it to say that God has two plans of salvation, and that would be out of step with historic Christianity. Like Dr. Broshi said last time, the Judaism of today is not the same as biblical Judaism. And what we as Gentiles are inviting our Jewish friends into is true biblical Judaism. We are saying Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. Come and believe in him and come into the new covenant. So if we are using the term Judeo-Christian in a way that's kind of this hybrid mix mash of religion, and I would say, yeah, I agree with Father Calvin. Like, that's not what we want to be doing. There is only one path to the Father, and that is through his son Jesus, the Jewish Messiah who died for the sins of the world. God has one plan of salvation. And so, we don't want to be out there saying, that, or insinuating by using the term Judeo-Christian that both religions are equally true. Because remember, the Judaism of today is not biblical Judaism. But we also need to hear God's warning against those of us who are in the covenant and are Gentiles about how we think and how we talk about our Jewish friends and family. God still has a plan to bring many of them to true faith in Jesus as the Messiah, and all the more as his return draws near. And all true Christians ought to pray for that. We ought to pray for the salvation of our Jewish friends. But if we are weaponizing the Bible to say that Jews are inherently God's enemies, or that we as Christians are within our rights to hate Jews, then we are in the wrong. Paul made that very clear in what I just read. Yes, it is true, according to Acts chapter 2 and Matthew 27 and other places. Yes, some Jews killed Jesus 2,000 years ago. But we also know from the New Testament that this is not a universal curse against all Jews in all times and all places. Otherwise, we would not agree with Paul to love Jewish people. Instead, we ought to say what it says in Romans chapter 10, when Paul says, brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God is for them that they may be saved. And they meaning Jews. For I bear them witness that they have zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own righteousness, they did not submit to God's righteousness. So yes, there was an error at the time that these Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah, but not all Jews. Many in the early church, and we see this in the book of Acts, were from the Jewish faith. So we have to understand and think about these things very, very biblically. Okay, we're going to take a short break. We're going to hear from our friends at Maven, and I'm going to check the comments and see what's happening there. And then we will come back, answer any questions from the comments, and then we're going to tackle another internet rumor related to the Jews, and that is the Scofield Reference Bible part of a massive Zionist conspiracy? We'll be right back.
Truth and courage. Christians need a good dose of both in this current cultural moment. That's why you need to be at the 2025 Maven Conference. We are going to look at the anti-Christian culture that we're currently in and the unique challenges that it presents to us. The challenges of expressive individualism, the authority of the self, and how that dominates so much of our society. And then also critical theory, the ideas that permeate every institution. And families and students need to figure out how to navigate those challenges. So join us for the Maven Conference, and there you'll get a good dose of both truth and courage. Go to mavenconferences.com to register.
Once again, Monique and I will be speaking at the upcoming Maven conferences later this year. There will be one in the North Dallas area in September, and I believe there's one in November in Indiana or Illinois. I can't remember. Maybe Natalie can look it up for me. I know Natalie's on one of my moderators, and she's on the stream right now. And Natalie, I appreciate your comment here. Values are based on the New and Old Testament. That's all Judeo-Christian values mean. That's correct. That's a good summary of what I am trying to say. Okay. We got another comment here. This is a great one. I'm not sure how people are defining Zionism. I'm not sure if it's a negative or a positive thing. Well, it really depends on who you ask and what their opinion is. We did cover kind of a definition of Zionism. If you go back in the archive from October of 2023, I had my friend Kelly Mitchell on, and we had a significant discussion about defining Zionism. What does that mean? But a quick definition is that you believe that the Jewish people have a right to exist in the land that has been their indigenous home for thousands of years, and that they are allowed to live there and have a government and a society and a culture. That is what it means to be a Zionist. Jewish people make up a very small percentage of the global population, but Israel is their only country. And so that's a kind of a rough and ready definition of what it means to be a Zionist. Okay, now for topic number 2. I wanted to avoid this topic, but it's just too big now. And it's growing, and I feel like somebody needs to address it. And so I guess that somebody is going to be me. And I'm not super excited about it because this is a topic that makes people very emotional. And I'm just asking, please hear me out, and I'm going to do my best. And if you have counter evidence, I welcome you. Okay. So you can send it to me, and my email's right on my website. You can go there and send me your counter evidence. All right. So have you heard the conspiracy theory about the Scofield Reference Bible? I have to admit, I only heard of this a few months ago. This was new for me. And I became aware of it when I saw this tweet from Candace Owens related to her. She was drawing a connection between her conversion to Catholicism and her discovery about the Scofield Reference Bible. Somebody asked her, genuinely curious as to what led you to the Catholic Church. Her response, and this was on Christmas Day, learning about the true origins of the Scofield Bible. And I thought, what in the world is she even talking about? The dots were not connecting for me. Again, this was completely new. I'd never heard this. So I wanted to start investigating, because then all of a sudden, once I saw this, I started seeing it kind of popping up other places. So just sort of a rough introduction into what the Scofield Reference Bible is. We're going to read a little bit on the Wikipedia entry. The Scofield Reference Bible is a widely circulated study Bible, edited and annotated by the American Bible student Cyrus I. Scofield. It popularized dispensationalism at the beginning of the 20th century. Published by Oxford University Press and containing the entire text of the traditional Protestant King James Version, it first appeared in 1909 and was revised by the author in 1917. So that's kind of a little introduction to what the Scofield Bible even is, in case that's new for some of you. This Bible is arguably the first widely circulated study Bible because it did something kind of unique in that it published the notes, the study notes, with the Bible itself. Now, we're very used to that. There are so many study Bibles out there, and I like the NIV study Bible. There's the ESV study Bible. There's so many study Bibles. But this is kind of a newish thing. And the idea of printing what is basically a commentary bound together with the Bible itself was a fairly new concept. And the notes were written for regular people. The idea that you could buy this study Bible and take it with you to church gave regular people the power to interpret the Bible for themselves. And at a time, contextually, in history, when there was a large division happening in the evangelical church, particularly in America and to some extent in England, between modernism and fundamentalism. And there was a kind of this trend at that time that when people would, young men would go off to seminary, and the seminaries at that time were really starting to branch into modernism and adopting a modernist point of view, which is, no virgin birth, no miracles of Jesus. It's kind of a very anti-supernatural type of worldview. The text came under extreme scrutiny, and the idea of having the text be inspired by the Holy Spirit was kind of going away. And so just imagine the powerlessness of the person in the pew. Their pastor, their minister, their priest has gone off to seminary and been infused with these modernist ideas. They're bringing them back into their pulpits in the local church. And the regular people are sitting there thinking, what's happening? Like, what am I hearing? Okay. So that's sort of the context in which the Scofield Reference Bible comes into being. And the reaction movement against modernism was called fundamentalism. And fundamentalism was the conservative kind of reaction to modernism that was trying to preserve the fundamentals of the faith. All right. And the Scofield Reference Bible became widely used among fundamentalists. And it gave the ability to regular people to interpret the Bible because they could read the notes. And so it kind of demystified a little bit what their pastor was doing up in the pulpit. And they had this handy dandy commentary that was embedded with the biblical text. Now, again, this was a fairly new and novel concept, but this is the one that was the most widely circulated, okay? But what you have to know about a study Bible is that every study Bible in existence has a pointed view. And the Scofield Reference Bible, its particular specific point of view was that of dispensationalism. Now, if you don't know what dispensationalism is, it's basically a framework for interpreting the Bible that divides history into different and distinct periods or dispensations, okay? And these are different ways that God interacts with humanity. And this originated in the 19th century with John Nelson Darby. Now, dispensationalists will claim it goes back to the church fathers, but I'm just going to say, for the sake of this conversation, the fully fledged, more developed framework originates with Darby and then is developed from there. And it really, one of its key distinguishing features of this approach to theology is that it emphasizes a sharp distinction between Israel and the church. as separate entities in God's plan. And with Israel's promises, most notably the promise of the land to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, as being a permanent promise that there ought to be an expectation of being literally fulfilled, and that Jews would return to the land, and that there would be a future millennium of 1,000 years, and after the church is raptured. These are some of the general features of the dispensational framework. Well, if you still don't know what I'm talking about, if you've ever seen this chart hanging in a church or in a Bible or something like that in your Sunday school class as a kid, this is how you know that you have entered into dispensational theology. And there's all of these different time periods and connections, and this very kind of complex way and framework and lens of how to interpret the Bible. This is a summary of dispensational theology. Well, and I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can. I grew up in a church where I saw this chart on a number of occasions. Now, the Scofield Study Bible played a significant role in the popularization of dispensational theology. And this is, again, a reaction to modernism. It is a fundamentalist effort of preserving the faith. Let's go back to the Wikipedia entry here for a minute and read a few more sentences to help summarize what happened. So go down under later editions, Bob. Right there. The 1917 Scofield Reference Bible notes are now in the public domain, and the 1917 edition is consistently the best-selling edition of the Scofield Bible in the UK and Ireland. Let's see here. Oh, that was not what I was expecting. Oh, right above later editions. I'm sorry, I read the wrong thing. That paragraph right there. The Scofield Bible has had a significant influence on the Christian Zionist movement. The work states that anti-Semitism is a sin, citing Genesis 12:3. I will bless them that bless thee, and to finish that, I will curse those who curse thee. Scofield argued that the man or nation that lifts a voice or hand against Israel invites the wrath of God. And so these notes played a big role in American Christianity, in particular, in the fundamentalist movement, to guide people toward a sympathy toward the Jewish people. Now, in the late 40s, when Israel was suddenly a nation, this was seen by many dispensational Christians as a clear sign of the truthfulness of the dispensational framework. And if your average Baptist, charismatic, there was a lot of major Protestant denominations that Calvary Chapel, the Vineyard, they were all in this dispensational fundamentalist stream. My old school, Biola University, the whole Bible college movement largely came out of dispensationalism. And there was this very kind of pro-Israel sentiment centering the Jews in God's plan of salvation. And that has been, for most of the 20th century, kind of the ethos of a lot of American Christianity. Now, I'm not talking here about Presbyterians, Methodists, Lutherans, Catholics. They did not adopt the dispensational framework, and they don't tend to have this same level of sympathy toward the state of Israel, the current geopolitical state of Israel. It's not that they're against Jews, it's just that it's not the existence of the geopolitical state of Israel is not embedded strongly in their theology. Okay, so this is all I realize like a long backstory, and this is why I didn't really want to do this. Okay, now going forward after the Candace Owens tweet, I thought, well, maybe I can ignore this. But then this happened on the Tucker Carlson show. A very famous country singer. I don't know if he's an aspiring Bible scholar or what. A guy I like, John Rich, came on the Tucker Carlson show and said this.
You're saying is the Scofield Bible, its theology is deceptive.
A very wealthy, very charismatic preacher named John Darby came with this doctrine that's now referred to as the secret rapture or the pre-tribulation rapture. And guess who he was connected to, by the way? The Rothschilds.
Interesting.
Have you ever heard of a Scofield Bible?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so C.I. Scofield was basically a student of John Darby, and he adopted that part of the doctrine, and he incorporated that into the Bible. It was the first Bible ever made that had study notes with it. It became so popular, every Christian was reading it, every minister was reading it, including me, including my own father. For a long time, that's what we believed too. But when you start actually going back and reading line by line by line what is said that will be leading up to Jesus coming back, which is when the rapture happens, it's the inverse of what John Darby put down.
My sense was the Scofield stuff, which has had massive implications for our foreign policy, for example, and in our domestic politics, was probably a lie. I do know that translation or that commentary on the Bible has had massive effects on our politics that have been very, very negative and resulted in the deaths of a lot of people.
Okay, so there's a lot there. Now, there's some there that I would agree with. I think it's historically accurate that Scofield used a lot of Darby's ideas and developed them. It is true that the Scofield Bible was, I don't know if it was the first to have study notes, but it was definitely the biggest and the most widely distributed and sold. But the account there is a little truncated in that it's not giving you some of the historical context about the modernist and fundamentalist controversy. And I will say that it is accurate that it did have a profound impact on shaping a lot of American Christians' views of Israel, and especially after Israel suddenly became a state after World War II. So there's some truths in what they're saying, but then there's also some claims that they're making that I'm like, okay, I don't really know if that's substantiated, because what they want to connect it to is the Rothschilds. Now, if you don't really know what the Rothschilds conspiracy is, it's kind of this, the gist of it here is that this very prominent and highly secretive Jewish banking family called the Rothschilds, there is this rumor that they were involved on some level with the establishment of Israel. And I haven't looked into that, so I don't know if that's true or not. But the part that pertains to the Scofield Bible is that they were also the ones financing the Scofield Bible. And by getting Christians on board with supporting Israel, by using the Bible's dispensational notes that emphasize a future role for Israel, this is kind of the line of thought of a certain group of people, that this is very bad. And so for many of these people who have this concern, they feel like it's kind of being led as sheep and following Israel, and that there is this idea that our government is more loyal to Israel than they are to their own people. It's part of a larger narrative and way of looking at the world. Okay, and so the Scofield Bible is put forward as a strategy move by the Rothschild family to help propagate sympathy for Israel. in the 20th century. And there are people who are speaking out saying, no, we should not be so sympathetic to Israel. And they have their own various reasons for saying that. Now, some very right-leaning Christian voices. I'm going to put Candace Owens in that category, recent convert to Catholicism. I think Tucker is on his own journey with the faith. He grew up as an Episcopalian and was very far from the faith. But in recent years, he seems to be kind of coming around. I don't know where he really is, but he's definitely in the stream of at least cultural Christianity. He has picked up on this narrative recently. Joe Rogan had a guest named Ian Carroll on there, and they did almost the same dialogue as you just saw there on the Tucker show with John Rich. And it's really picking up some steam that dispensationalism and the Scofield Bible are tied into a narrative that there's danger with at least some kind of a deep state of Jews, and that this is dangerous to our nation and the good of the world. And this is a rumor that is growing and getting exposure now to millions of people. These videos on social media have had millions of views. Now, when I used the word conspiracy theory earlier, I want to make very clear what my position is. I do think some conspiracy theories are actually real. I'm not using it in the usual pejorative way. And I've said this before. I think that, I guess we're going to find out tomorrow. They're going to suddenly declassify the documents tomorrow, allegedly, about the JFK assassination. I think that based on the documents that have already been released in recent years, there's a likelihood that our own government may have had something to do with that. But apparently, possibly, we're going to find out more about that very soon. I think it's been pretty well established now that a group of people conspired in 2020 to hide the origin of a certain virus, and the certain remedies for that virus, calling them safe and effective, where they colluded to tell us certain messages. The New York Times just published a big op-ed piece acknowledging that just a couple of days ago. So I am not using the term conspiracy theory as a pejorative of saying all conspiracy theories are wrong or stupid or only stupid people believe in them. I do think that when people conspire to do something or keep some secret or accomplish a goal, that does need multiple lines of evidence. I think it's a claim that needs to be proven. It needs confirmation. It ought to be looked into by parties and able to be verified even by people that disagree with the issue. So, when I think about how can I investigate this, let's say, all right, I want to be open to the claim, the rumor that some nefarious Zionist Jews funded the Scofield Bible to further their agenda, and this resulted in the consequence of making American Christians more sympathetic to supporting Israel, and that's a bad thing. Okay, so how do I look into this? Well, I tried to look into it. It's actually kind of difficult to look into and verify. It seems like a lot of the sources all repeat each other. They have a lot of the similar talking points. And when they point you to different things, there's not a lot of primary source information that can support the collusion part of it. But I'm open to the collusion. I just don't see evidence for the collusion. So I found a channel here, the Bible Sojourner channel. I watch his content occasionally. He's a dispensational scholar. He's an Old Testament scholar. And I like him. He's pretty balanced. I am not a dispensationalist, but I do appreciate watching content from other perspectives. And he actually looked into this rumor too. And I think he has a very balanced approach in general. He's very research oriented in his approach, not sensational. And so I want to play for you his conclusion from his channel. And again, he was looking into the Scofield Bible situation.
Say, okay, if, for sake of argument, the Zionist Jews did provide financial help to Scofield for publishing this Scofield Reference Bible, who cares? Okay, who cares? All right, that would be one of the answers to really like bring up, is that has no bearing on whether something is true or not. And it appeals to conspiracy theory individuals who are trying to find some hidden knowledge or hidden insight into, oh, did you know that this actually is funded by Zionist Jews who wanted to support the dispensational system or whatever. And the reality is that has no bearing on whether or not it's true.
Okay, I just want to stop it really fast, because what he's talking about here is the claim that Zionist Jews funded it. Technically speaking, that's what we call in logic a red herring. It's a type of fallacy, because it really has no bearing on the accuracy of the Bible or even the accuracy of the study notes. Now, I totally disagree with a lot of the study notes in the Scofield Bible. And again, I am not a dispensationalist, but the accuracy of the notes is not tied intrinsically to who financed it. Now, that might have something to do with it, but that would be a claim that would need to be proven, not just thrown out there. Okay, let's continue. We're going to fast forward to minute 2 here. Yeah.
So, yeah, this argument is really a red herring as far as a distraction. It has no bearing on the actual issue. And so at the outset, we need to understand that is if Zionist Jews did help fund the Scofield Reference Bible, well, big deal at that point, right? But here's the real thing is I want to be faithful. I want to do my due diligence. I don't want to leave any stones unturned, as it were. And so I tried to research this as best I could because, hey, if people like Webben, Webben's got a loud voice, right? He's got the followers, he's got the channel, he's got the platform. So if he's saying that Zionist Jews have, and he's just saying, I don't want to be unhinged, I just want to say the facts that this is what happened. I said, well, it better be readily available. I mean, this is going to be obvious then. And I searched high and low. I consulted my history books. I asked my friends who are in the history fields. I asked like my academically reputable friends. I'm just saying, like, help me out with this. Like, give me something. Is there anything about Jews funding the Scofield Bible? And you know what always came back? Crickets, crickets, crickets. And I want to give you what I did find, because I think that this could be helpful. I would love to have more information. I mean, I want people to point these things out to me, but that's the thing is I haven't found anything. Nobody has pointed anything verifiable for that. So what I did find by going back to the original sources, there's a guy, Gabeline, who actually was a contemporary of Scofield, who actually wrote a history of the Scofield Reference Bible. Okay, so he's got some good things to say. So he actually talks about the funding of the Scofield Reference Bible. So this is a source from the time of Scofield, and he's talking about the funding of it, and he lists 4 individuals that are involved with this, okay? So he lists Alwyn Ball Jr. of New York. He lists John T. Perry of Chicago, John Boos of St. Louis, and Francis E. Fitch of New York. Okay, so those are the 4 individuals that I was able to find in researching high and low for all of this. And best I can tell, I've tried to research as much as possible. Nothing Jewish about them. Their names are definitely not Jewish, that's for sure. There doesn't seem to be any Jewish ancestry in those names whatsoever. Nothing that I could find about them was Jewish. But according to multiple sources, the 2 individuals most prominent in funding the Scofield Bible were Perry and Ball. Okay, those are the two men, Alwyn Ball of New York and Perry of Chicago. So basically the background to that is in 1902, Scofield, making these connections, basically becomes convinced he needs to resign from the pastorate and start working on the study Bible. And so he does that in 1902. And then you have Gabeline, who helps him secure the funding from these individuals for that project. And then you have Fitch, not Finch. You have Francis E. Fitch, who actually is the primary guy who helps handle the publishing for Oxford. And so, yeah, I mean, I just don't see any evidence whatsoever. Like I went and I looked. I mean, Webben is saying this is a slam dunk argument. You just, but again, I think this is just kind of ridiculous to make these kinds of appeals and expect people to believe you if there's no kind of evidence for that.
Yeah, and I have to say that I pretty much found the same as this guy. That's why I just played the clip. I don't really have anything else to add to it. And so as of right now, I am disputing the whole Rothschilds funded the Scofield Bible to purposefully invoke sympathy on American evangelicals to Israel internet rumor. As far as I can tell, there is not primary sourced evidence to support this claim. Now, if you have that primary sourced evidence, please send it to me. I will make a follow-up video. I will correct the record, but I have looked. I honestly can't find any direct evidence for this claim, but I know that those videos have millions of views. People are repeating this over and over again. And so the best I can say is it's always a good rule of thumb. Whenever you hear someone make a claim, ask questions, ask for primary sources. Where is this person getting their information? So that's my answer as of today, the 17th of March, 2025, to the Scofield Reference Bible Zionist funding internet rumor. That's what I've got. But again, I welcome your sources if you have those. So final thoughts. I have no doubt that there are corrupt people who are Jews. There are. Whether there are secret Jews posing as Christians or whether there is a deep state of Jews, some kind of Jewish oligarchy pulling the globalist strings, it could be. But again, that's a claim that needs sufficient evidence. And I would say, in my humble opinion, that the evidence just isn't there right now. In my opinion, what we should be focusing on is not trying to figure out, this kind of ethnic cabal, because I think for every one of these people of Jewish origin who does wicked things, you could probably find someone who's grew up in a Christian home and does wicked things too. But in my opinion, all of this fighting over this distracts us from the real issue, which is the evidence that is in front of us, the evidence right in front of our eyes, and that is that there are a lot of evil people in the world. I don't know if I necessarily think that whether or not they're Jewish or real Jews or fake Jews or progressive Muslims or progressive Christians or Shia Muslims or even white supremacists who call themselves Christians, like there's just a lot of evil in the world. Like I understand it's an unpopular opinion right now, but to me, what actually matters is that decent people stand against evil in the world. We name it, we identify it, we hold people accountable for it. And so if somebody owns a company that makes webcamming corn, I would say call that out. Whatever the person's identity is, or their ethnicity, their religion, I'm not sure that that's totally relevant. It might be, but that would have to be investigated. There would have to be evidence for that. That that their religion is prompting that. I think the focus needs to be more on catching these people, arresting them, taking them to court, having accountability, which is something that our world really lacks at this moment. And sometimes I wonder if some of our fascination with some of these darker theories is because there's a part of us that just feels so frustrated that the world seems like such an unjust place. And so we want to find these connections, Because really what the yearning is we want our government to do something about all of this wickedness that we see around us. If a person is participating or even reenacting Luciferian blood worship, I think the main focus should be on calling out the evil that we know. If a person is heading up a blackmail ring to trap world leaders in compromising positions, decent people need to call that out. I just am not so focused on the person's ethnicity or the existence of some kind of cabal. I'm just trying to look at the thing and saying, that's wrong. We need to be holding people accountable for this evil. We need to take it to court. We need subpoenas. We need transparency. We need FOIA requests and due process and jailing and these sorts of a thing. This is where my heart is at. And you can have thoughts about the pros and cons of the state of the geopolitical state of Israel and their policies. I have a lot of thoughts, and sometimes I agree with them and sometimes I don't. But that's also true of my own government. Sometimes I agree with them and sometimes I don't. And we can have an interesting and lively conversation about whether or not it's in our best interest to be a geopolitical ally with them. And there might be some strategic reasons for that, or there might not be, or what's in the best interest of our country. That's fine. We could talk about all of those things. We can have thoughts about how to best characterize God's plan for the Jewish people before his second coming. That's fine. We can talk about that. But this whole Jews are secretly controlling the world, or deep state secret Jews are secretly controlling the world. I don't know. In my candid opinion, this distracts us from the real evil that is happening right in front of us. And so with that, I want to leave you with a couple of resources that I have found helpful in navigating through this season in the last 14, 15 months. I've been following both of these accounts for well over a year, and so I feel okay about recommending them. They've been helpful to me and accurate. The first is independent war reporter Chuck Holton. He's an occasional reporter for Newsmax and CBN News. His personal channel on YouTube is called The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton. He does reporting from all over the world. I started watching him in October 2023 because he was doing live streams from Israel about the war. I found his point of view very helpful, similar to my friend Kevin Briggins. We're actually going to have him on the show this Saturday on All the Things, so you'll get to know him. So again, that's Chuck Holton. The Hot Zone is his channel. The second resource I want to commend to you is the Philos Project. They're a group of Christians working to report on events in the Middle East in a fair and accurate way. You can go check out their work. I have found their podcast to also be very helpful and accurate, and my friend Kevin Briggins has said the same. Philos Project is Philos. Philos. It's kind of a Greek word, Philos Project. Philos. And I'm going to put a bookmark there now for this topic. Next week, we'll be having a special show. As part of my Theology Moms Advice series, we'll be talking to my friend and mentor, Ken Samples, getting his thoughts about being a lifelong learner. Ken has been a big influence in my life on this issue, and I'm excited to share his wisdom with you. Please make sure to share this show and check out my other teachings in the playlist in the description. If you missed any of the past teachings related to this topic, I've covered it a number of different ways, different angles. And I do look forward to your feedback about this. And with that, have a good week and God bless.